You're good. We're all here.
Okay, so we're here again. Sorry about that. I locked up on trying to go in there. So I guess I'll just describe this instead of trying to show you because it looks like our bandwidth is a little problematic. So the idea is that you're going to, right, when you get a poll of 2,000 people, right, and it's registered voters, you're going to get a smaller error of measurement, and that's going to be a much more accurate poll. And that's what you want, right? If you can afford it and you've got the time and you've got the infrastructure, you want to look to polls that have good numbers like that have a small standard of error, measurement error, a good number of people. And again, if we're looking at Texas, we're looking at 750, 800 people is a good number, right? And that'll give us a solid survey. And a place like Real Clear Politics will give you that kind of information. So if you construct that poll right, they'll give you the information you need to know to kind of get a sense about the accuracy of the poll and whether they're doing it right. Usually you can open a poll up and it'll have a whole couple pages that talk about how they did their process. And those are the ones you're looking for, people that are very transparent about how they did a poll. And they'll tell you what they perceive to be their limitations on their polls. Ones that don't give you that kind of information, ones that are just giving you results that look like they're trying to tell you what to think. Everybody's thinking this, and those you got to be a little careful about because those might have a different focus behind them. And what I mean by that is that we have to be good consumers of public opinion polls because while you have a lot of organizations out there that are doing good public opinion work and following best practices and good statistics and good question writing, you also have amateur firms that are doing it. And then you also, and they may not be as good on their process. And then you also have firms that are for hire, that are consulting polling firms that are hired to generate a product, that are hired to deliver a result. And they're not, right, they're there to make a buck and to give their customer what they want, and not necessarily there to give good information to everybody. So there's definitely a good, bad, and ugly in this situation here, right? So as a consumer of the polls, you're looking for polls that are done the right way, that are focused on delivering as true a message, right, and set of results to the questions they ask as possible, regardless of what those results may be, right? Because a good polling firm, it doesn't matter whether the answer is yes, no, maybe, or something else, as long as the answer is accurate, because they're trying to give you good information, which is crucial in any kind of democratic exercise, right? If we want to make good decisions, we need to have good information. So public opinion polls that are doing the best job possible provide really good resources for us in a democratic situation because they allow us to link our opinions and beliefs as voters and residents and citizens to our government, and that information gets delivered about our preferences to our representative governments, and they can then rely on that, saying, okay, I know that 60% of the people in my precinct want me to do X, and if I'm wanting to be a good representative of the folks in my precinct, I'll pay attention to that, right? It's a good piece of information for representatives in government. So, in that sense, that's a good thing, right? It's a good tool for democracy. We want to see that. If the information that is coming out is not well formed, in other words, if the opinion poll doesn't do a good job on their maths and their statistics and their question writing, even if they think they might have done well, right? If they're putting out bad information, that's a bad thing, right? We don't want, right, that to happen. And so even unintentional wrong information is damaging to a democratic situation. So we should be on the lookout for trying to find polling firms that have a good reputation and do good work. New firms that are just learning their business, we need to, they're not necessarily wrong, but we need to dig into them a little deeper to make sure that how they're doing their business, their polling is proper. If you've got an ABC, CBS, or Times polling, Gallup poll, um, you're probably looking at a good poll. If you're looking at a university-based poll, most of the time you're going to be looking at a very good poll because they probably have well-trained statisticians and political science folks running those. And so they as a research institution, they get the time to do it right. It's when you get the for-hire consulting firms you have to start worrying about what you're seeing. Is this a new firm that's just kind of stretching their legs in this area? They're just starting getting into polling. They may have great intentions, but if they're putting out bad information and people rely upon it, that's a bad thing for democracy. And then the polling organizations that are out there just to make a buck, not to tap into what people are thinking. They're just flat out dishonest, right? And you'll see those sometimes, right? You'll read questions and go, man, that question really wants me to answer this way. If you feel that when you read a question that it's directing you toward a particular answer, that's probably an ugly poll. That's probably somebody that's being paid to deliver a polling result with a defined result. So let's say I'm running for office and I want something out there in the media that shows that I'm a popular and successful candidate. I could, if I had the money, go to a polling organization that's for hire and have them write and exercise a poll that will pretty much guarantee good results for me as a candidate and bad results for my opponent, right? And if consumers of that are not paying attention, they'll go, well, look, most people think this person here is a great candidate. Maybe I ought to think about them a little more than I was before, right? When what happened was they're a terrible candidate and they're dishonest, they hired somebody to seed a particular piece of information, right, polling result into the media. And if the media is doing its job, maybe it'll filter that out and not report it. But with the internet the way it is, any organization can generate their own media stream and put whatever information they want into it. And so, which means it's very difficult for us as consumers to keep track of that and know what we're looking at. But there's a general tendency among people, especially people that will answer polls, to just unconsciously answer the way they think the polling organization wants them to answer, right? And so we know this is just an effect, a polling effect, that it happens. That, the people aren't trying to throw the poll off and give bad information, but someone's like, oh yeah, I'll answer your survey. Most of the time, people that say yes to doing a survey are then unconsciously going, thinking about, oh, they want this, they're looking for this. This is the answer that's the right answer. I want to give a right answer, right? And so we have to be on guard about that. And we can put provisions in place to filter for that if we're trying to. But if we're looking to skew a poll a particular direction, then I can write questions that will give cues to the people answering the poll about what the right answer is. And in doing that, control the results of that poll. And that's dishonest, that's deceptive, that's bad for democracy. But the fact of the matter is that in the kind of economic and political situation that we're in today, people can and do fill that spot in the polling areas. And so you got to be careful about that. Another good place, if you're interested in polling, to go look at recent polls and to get good in-depth discussion about what the poll, if the poll's good and what the poll means. There's a place, the guy that runs it, his name is Nate Silver. And if you follow politics on TV, you've probably seen him interviewed. He has an organization called 538.com or .org, I don't remember. And he's run an organization that aggregates poll results and then tries to tell you what's going on based on that. And he's a very good statistician. He cut his teeth on baseball statistics and projecting gambling results on baseball, and was very successful at that. And it translates well into politics. It's a takeoff on the sabermetric stuff that goes on in baseball. And so if you know that, this guy's got some number knowledge behind him. He's pretty good. And he's really good about explaining what's going on in polling, and if polling is accurate and how much we can trust what we're seeing. And you'll see him a lot of times, especially during presidential election periods. Networks will talk to him about, okay, well, here are the polling results that we see. Are these good? Do these make sense? Is this true? Can we, and he'll tell you, here's what it really means. And so he's a very knowledgeable person. It's 538 is that website. So any questions about public opinion polling and how it works and how it ties into to government and politics? Right, it's one of those linkages, right? It's really useful for us, and it puts information into the system. All right, so it's 11:35. We got about 15 more minutes or so. So let's go ahead and, since there aren't any questions, go ahead and jump into the next chapter, right? Which is chapter 5. We're going to start talking about political parties, interest groups, and one of my favorite topics, the media. So what we're transitioning into now is looking at how would you describe it? Elements of our political system, linkage institutions. And we're going to start off with the media, right, which is not part of the political system, but is part and parcel of understanding it and having access to it. Right? We can't get, as voters, what we need to know without going through the media. Right? Because government is usually at a distance from us, right, where it's happening, and we don't have unfettered access to the whole political system. We rely upon the media to act as an intermediary for us in a lot of ways. And in that sense, the media, right, the TV, newspapers, radio, internet, wherever it is that you might be able to get political information about your system that you're interested in, that media is providing up to 3 different roles politically for us. The biggest role, the one that we're most attuned to the media playing, is a role of providing information. Right? Most of us don't have the time, don't want to put out the effort, don't have the access to gather information ourselves about politics. We rely upon the media in some form or fashion to gather, organize, and deliver messages and information about the political system. Now, we as consumers play a big role in where we decide to accept that information from, right? Some of us are real old school and read newspapers, right? We actually have them, paper actually thrown on our driveway every morning. Some of us are on the radio. Some of us are on TV, some of us are on the internet, some of us are some mixture of all of those, right? But we choose the transmission form of that information, but all of those are flows of information that are coming to us that the media has selected, packaged, and is delivering one way or another to us, and we rely upon that. And we'll talk about that process here in a little bit. The second role that we consistently see from the media is the inverse of the communication role, and that's the communication role. Whereas information, right, they're sending information about politics to us, and we're consuming that. The communication role of media is to provide a two-way street for communication, or two-way link for communication between the government and us as voters, right? And so anytime you see them doing public opinion polling, anytime you see them doing interviews, right, with government members and voters, right? Anytime you see them doing group panel meetings and things, they're right sending information both directions, right? And in that sense, they're getting information into the political system based off of how they interact with us and the questions they ask us and how we respond to those questions. And if you go to the government side of things and you talk to politicians, they're very reliant on information from the mass media about the voters, right? So information comes to us from the mass media, right? Information comes to the politicians in the mass media. And when they're doing both of those, right, it's a communication link, right? It allows us to talk to them and them to talk to us through this intermediary that we wouldn't otherwise have. So that's very important, right? It's not just here's information, but it's also communication. And then the third role is the watchdog role. And this is where the media picks up an investigative kind of approach to looking at what's going on. They're not just taking information that the government or members of the government have given to them and said, okay, well, here's what we did today, right? And then gave that to us. They're not just taking opinions from us and giving it to the government. The watchdog role is where they go out on their own and say, this doesn't look right. This that we see happening shouldn't be happening. And we need to tell someone. We need to alert, right, other parts of the government or the people in general, right, the voters in general, that this is happening. And so they're going to fill this watchdog role of keeping an eye on government and, right, trying to reconcile what government's doing with what the expectations of government are. Constitution says the president's supposed to do these things, and we see him doing this thing over here that's not in that list. Someone should know the president's not doing what he's supposed to, right? Or your electrical grid crashes because of a big winter storm, and everybody's trying to figure out, why did this happen? How did this happen? And who should we yell at? And the media, right, can go into their investigative mode and go, okay, there are an awful lot of players in the Texas energy scene. And it looks like regulation is kind of lax. And it looks like there hasn't been, that this isn't the first time we've had this problem. And here are the reports that told us how to fix it 10 years ago, but we didn't. And who's responsible for the fact that we didn't? That's investigative reporting. That's the media in their watchdog role. So they're not just relaying information and they're not just giving us information. They're actually out doing the investigation that generates new information, right? That tells us something about the system, political system, and whether it's good or bad, and lets us then exercise our abilities as voters and members of government. So those are the three general roles that we see within the mass media that it should be playing that have a political impact. Are there any questions about that? Does that make sense? So let's talk about this, right? Let's talk about the news process, because we say mass media, what we generally mean is the way we get information, right? And the way it's transmitted to us. We're talking generally about the news organizations that are paying attention to the government. They have a role first to figure out all of this stuff that's happening in Austin and all of this stuff that's happening in all the county seats and then the city governments. What do we talk about? Right? We're the news organization. How do we report the news? What is the news that we're going to report? How do we know it when we see it? So one of the things you have to understand is they have to go through the process of deciding what the news is. Now, sometimes that's very easy, right? Something occurs and everybody would look at it and go, yeah, that's news. We need to know that. We need to know about what's going on here. But sometimes, right, it's not as apparent. And so one of the things that the news organizations do is they figure out first, out of all of the things that are going on and all of the stuff that people are saying, which ones are news, which ones are newsworthy. And here's a short list of 5 criteria that the news uses to determine if something is worthy of being talked about. They ask questions about the incident or the thing they're covering. They say, is this going to cause an impact in society? Is this going to impact anyone? And if it is, do we have some obligation to tell them that this is coming, right? That this is going to be out there. So they look at the impact of an action or a process and try to decide how important it is, what impact it's going to make. If whatever they're looking at, part of the impact that they see is a violent impact, it's going to be news, right? Anytime, right, you're living in a society and the point of society is to have one that's fairly violent free, that lets you go do what you need to do and live your life the way you need to. And if there's something that's disrupting that's a problem in society as a whole, and it's something that government ought to be trying to make sure doesn't happen, right? It's violent. That's important, and we need to know about it. Most often, right, it's also something that's going to make an impact on somebody. So violence in and of itself is going to be impactful. So that's the way to know. So if somebody's getting shot, somebody's is victimized some way or another, it's almost certainly news, right? And if it's the government that's included in that violence, whether there is the object of violence or whether the instigator of violence, it's definitely news, right? Something that politically they need to be talking to us about. How many of you are aware that President Biden authorized a military attack a couple days ago? That we went in and bombed people, right? That's good, right? That means, right, that the media is putting that information out there. They're going, oh, federal government, right, executed some violence. We should tell people, right? We should know those things, right? And so, part of it might be how much you're paying attention to the news and what news you're paying attention to, right? If you're focused on Texas politics right now, you probably didn't hear that, right? But that's something that government, right, when it does something like that, people need to know, right? Is it possible that his actions could lead to more violence and maybe even state violence right between us and Iran? It's possible, right? Essentially what happened is that some non-state actors, in other words, people that the government, Iran does not claim, attacked U.S. embassy not U.S. embassy, U.S. embassy, U.S. property, and injured some U.S. Military folks. And President Biden, right, once he got the information from the folks on the ground about who attacked them and where they were, went and took out some of their resources, right? Now we know these people that do this are supported militarily and financially by the government of Iran. We didn't actually go bomb Iran, right? We bombed these non-state folks and their stuff. So it's, part of what we hear is, oh, it looks like this was a proportionate response of force against force, and we didn't let them get away with anything. We didn't just go, oh, we don't know who they were, right? We also didn't just go nuke Iran, right, which would be a way out of proportion response violently with what we experienced. So, right, but anytime, right, a government member gets us involved in violence, our government violence, we need to know that. The news needs to tell us. And they did, right? They did bring that message out to us. So that was news, right? If you remember President Trump, right, when he killed that Iranian general in Iraq, right? And there's a lot of speculation of, whoa, right? Was that commiserate? Was that proportional? Is this going to, commit us to? And we were concerned about it, but we knew about it, right? And that's the media's job, right? Is to tell us those kinds of things on the violence scale. On the familiarity, right? If there's an event happening that most of us are already familiar with that should be happening, or it might be happening, and the media is paying attention, right? They know that we're familiar with this, and that's something that we want to know, then they should deliver that to us. So if something's going on in Texas politics here in Austin, right, the Texas media knows that Texans are familiar with the legislature's in session and it's working through legislation. And so Texas media would go, hey, Texans need, because they're familiar with this process and expect some information about it right now, we need to tell Texans about this. But we don't need to tell Arkansans about it, right? They're not familiar. It's not going to impact them, right? They don't need this information. So they have to make that call, right? Do they need to know? Is it something, what do they already know that would lead them to the position of wanting to know more, right? They need to be asking those kinds of questions. I'm going to stop here, right, at familiar, and we'll pick back up on this on Thursday. Any questions here at the end of the day?
No, thank you, Professor. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.